Conrad Rohrer, consumed by battle fever, saw only a fleeing Comanche. He aimed his rifle, ready to dispense frontier justice on the figure retreating on a mule. Once, twice, his gun misfired, a strange intervention in the heat of the moment. Only as he prepared a third, determined shot did a horrifying realization dawn on his comrade. The target wasn't a warrior at all. Who was truly in Rohrer's sights? And would this last shot prove fatal? In the 18th of January 36, the Texas frontier was a crucible of conflict. While the nascent Republic of Texas contended with Mexican forces to the south, a more protracted and intimate war festered in the hill country near Austin. For decades, Texas Rangers and Comanche warriors had engaged in a cycle of raid and reprisal, their clashes etching a brutal legacy onto the land. Near a bend in the Colorado River known as Hornsby's, a detachment of Rangers concluded a long day's patrol. Fatigue gnawed at them, compounded by hunger and the penetrating winter cold. Their immediate objective was a defensible spot for rest and a meal. As twilight conceded to darkness, a sound, thin and desperate, reached them over the rustle of the river. It was a human cry, weak but insistent. The Rangers moved towards the sound. Emerging from the frigid waters of the Colorado, a young woman, her clothing shredded and her body bearing the marks of severe abuse, crawled onto the bank near their intended camp. She wept, a raw outpouring of grief, fear, and perhaps a sliver of relief, but she was unable to articulate her plight, her strength spent. She could only propel herself towards the armed men. Several Rangers immediately went to her assistance, their own discomfort forgotten in the face of such evident suffering. They gently supported her, their questions initially met with only broken sobs. The story, when it came, would galvanize them into immediate, violent action. After several minutes of uncontrolled weeping, the woman, identified as Mrs. Hibbins, gradually composed herself enough to speak. Her account painted a grim picture of frontier vulnerability. Only days before, she, her husband, her brother, and her 2 young children had been traveling along the Guadalupe River, approximately 40 miles distant, en route to their homestead near Gonzales. As they neared their destination, a war party of Comanche warriors launched an attack. The assault was swift and brutal. Her husband and brother were quickly dispatched. Mrs. Hibbins and her 2 small children were taken captive. She possessed a grim understanding of Comanche practices regarding prisoners. Adult male combatants often faced a swift demise or prolonged torture. Women and children, however, were frequently assimilated into the tribe. The Comanche, pragmatic in their approach to survival and warfare, would accept Texans or Mexicans into their ranks. This did not, however, guarantee benign treatment for captives. Women, particularly, were vulnerable to various forms of assault. Adult females could expect forced labor, menial servitude, and to be taken as concubines by warriors. Over time, after periods of subjugation and abuse, some might be adopted into a family or even marry within the tribe. Children, especially younger ones, were often adopted more readily, seen as replacements for offspring lost to conflict or disease. Following an initial period of hardship, characterized by thirst, hunger, and exposure, these children could achieve full integration and even positions of status. Mrs. Hibbins' narrative then took a darker turn, illustrating the precariousness of a captive's existence. Her youngest child, an infant, had cried persistently during the arduous journey with the Comanche. This continued lamentation irritated one of the warriors. Without warning, he seized the baby from Mrs. Hibbins' arms and, with cold finality, executed the child before her eyes. The act, designed perhaps to enforce obedience, or simply to silence a nuisance, galvanized Mrs. Hibbins. Her grief was profound, but the instinct to save her remaining child, a young boy, overrode all else. Knowing the risks, she made a desperate decision. That night, She waited until the Comanche camp was quiet, left her surviving son hidden as best she could, and slipped into the darkness. Her objective was Austin, the nearest significant Texan settlement where she might find help. She crawled through the prairie under the cover of night, acutely aware that recapture would undoubtedly mean her own end. Eventually, she reached the Colorado River and began to follow it westward towards Austin. The ordeal had stripped her of everything but a singular, desperate focus: the safety and rescue of her son. She provided the rangers with a detailed description of the boy, the specific mule he had been riding, and the last known location of the Comanche encampment, a dense cedar brake situated not far from Austin. The rangers' response to Mrs. Hibbins' account was immediate. A small contingent of the younger men remained at Hornsby's Bend to provide care and security for the traumatized woman. The main body, their weariness replaced by a grim determination, rapidly prepared their horses and weapons. Their objective was clear: locate the Comanche camp and recover the Hibbins child, guided by Mrs. Hibbins' information. They rode along the banks of the Colorado River, scanning for a practical ford. They decided against a night crossing, opting to wait for the first light of dawn. As the sun began to illuminate the landscape, they navigated their mounts across the river and moved into the undulating cedar-choked hills. Among the pursuers was Noah Smithwick, a young Texan in his early 20s. Despite his youth, Smithwick had already earned a reputation for his effectiveness in engagements with the Comanche. His initial period of service with the Rangers had provided him with a harsh but thorough education in their enemy's preferred tactics and fighting style. Smithwick listened intently to Mrs. Hibbins' description of the Comanche's movements. He theorized that the war party, burdened with a captive child and believing themselves secure from immediate reprisal, might not have traveled far. The possibility of a successful rescue, therefore, seemed plausible. Smithwick later recalled their initial efforts. As soon as it was light enough, our scouts were out and soon found the trail fresh and well-defined, as if the marauders were exercising neither haste nor caution in their retreat. His observation confirmed his assessment. The Comanche party, evidently confident after their raid, seemed unconcerned about the prospect of a captive escaping or a swift pursuit. Their trail was clear, lacking the usual signs of a hasty or cautious withdrawal. This lack of vigilance on the part of the Comanche would prove to be a critical factor. Bolstered by the easily discernible tracks, the Rangers pressed on. Around 10 a.m., their scouts signaled the discovery of the Comanche encampment. The Comanche warriors, caught completely unaware by the Rangers' sudden appearance, reacted with instinctual flight. They scrambled into the dense cover of the surrounding cedar brake, abandoning their camp and most of their possessions, retaining only the weapons they could hastily grab. Noah Smithwick, mounted on a spirited and fast horse, spurred his animal directly into the scattering group of Comanche. As he closed in, a warrior ducked behind a cedar tree and discharged a flintlock musket at him. The shot was hurried and missed its mark. Smithwick's horse, agitated by the gunfire and the chaotic pursuit, became difficult to control. He dismounted swiftly and continued the chase on foot after his intended target. Smithwick, understanding that the warrior's single-shot weapon was now empty, raised his own rifle and returned fire. He saw the Comanche fall. Smithwick later stated, "My blood was up, and leaving him for dead, I ran on loading my rifle as I ran hoping to bring down another." As Smithwick pressed forward, reloading his rifle on the move, a low-hanging branch struck his head and knocked off his hat. In the dim, confusing light of the thick cedar forest, another Texas Ranger scanning for targets perceived Smithwick's dark, now bare head as that of a Comanche warrior. The Ranger leveled his rifle at Smithwick, a friendly fire incident imminent. At the critical instant, a third Ranger, recognizing Smithwick, lunged and struck his comrade's rifle barrel downwards, deflecting the shot harmlessly into the ground. Meanwhile, the warrior Smithwick had shot, and presumed dispatched, was in fact still alive and posed a threat. Ranger Captain John Tumbleson, maneuvering on horseback, was firing into the dispersed Comanche force. The wounded Comanche, demonstrating considerable resilience, managed to reload his musket with what was likely his last round of ammunition and fired at Tumbleson. The projectile narrowly missed the ranger captain but struck his horse, which collapsed, dispatching the animal instantly. Captain Tumbleson worked to extricate himself from beneath the weight of his fallen mount. Another ranger, Conrad Rohrer, observing the situation, advanced on the wounded warrior and wrenched the empty firearm from his grasp. Rohrer then used his own weapon, or a clubbed rifle, to dispatch the tenacious Comanche with several forceful blows to the head. Concurrently with this desperate close-quarters fighting, other Comanche warriors moved quickly to secure their only remaining captive. They hastily wrapped the young Hibbins child in a large buffalo robe, likely to conceal him and make him appear as a bundle of goods, and placed him onto a pack mule. Amidst the swirling confusion of the engagement, the mule carrying the boy bolted, attempting to keep pace with the main body of retreating Comanche. Conrad Rohrer, his combat instincts still heightened from the recent lethal encounter, along with another ranger, broke off from the main group to pursue this smaller, rapidly moving contingent. The terrified Hibbins child, enveloped in the robe, rode precariously at the rear of this fleeing party. For several terrifying moments, the two rangers, rifles raised, galloped hard after the mule and its small rider, mistaking the bundled child for a diminutive Comanche warrior attempting to escape. Rohrer, driven by the imperative to prevent any Comanche from eluding them, aimed his rifle squarely at the back of the figure on the mule and pulled the trigger. The flintlock mechanism sparked, but the main charge failed to ignite. The gun had misfired, or jammed, as described in some accounts, a common occurrence with firearms of the period, especially in damp conditions or with hastily loaded powder. His horse continued its charge through the dense cedar and over the rocky, uneven terrain. Rohrer, still on the move, attempted to clear the obstruction or reprime his weapon. Once more, he took aim at the child, shrouded in the buffalo robe, and squeezed the trigger. Again, the weapon failed to discharge. With considerable difficulty, Rohrer tried a third time to make his rifle ready while maintaining his pursuit at speed. Just as Rohrer was about to attempt a third shot, his companion, riding alongside him, suddenly realized the true identity of the small figure on the mule. Shouting a warning, the fellow ranger thrust out his hand and violently jerked Rohrer's arm upwards at the precise moment Rohrer pulled the trigger for the third time. This time, the rifle fired. A loud report echoed through the trees, momentarily deafening the nearby rangers. The .50 Or 60 caliber lead ball, however, passed harmlessly over the Hibbins child's head. Smithwick, reflecting on this sequence of events, later wrote, "Providence seemed to have interposed to save him." The rangers quickly surrounded the mule and brought it to a halt. Despite the multiple near-fatal errors, their primary mission, the rescue of the Hibbins child, was accomplished. The remaining Comanche warriors, having lost several of their party and their captive, continued their retreat westward into the Texas hills. With the immediate engagement concluded and the Hibbins child secured, the Texas Rangers regrouped. They conducted a quick assessment of their own status, no serious injuries among them, though Captain Tumbleson had lost his horse, and discussed their next course of action. The decision was made swiftly. They would proceed directly to Austin, a journey of approximately 10 miles on foot, to return the child, undoubtedly traumatized but physically unharmed by the battle, to his grieving mother. Before their departure, however, there was another matter to attend to, what Noah Smithwick termed the grisly business of harvesting what the Rangers hold as their rightful war trophies. This practice, specifically scalping, had become an ingrained if grim tradition among some Texas Rangers by 1836. The adoption of such customs stemmed from the brutal realities of the Texas frontier environment. From their earliest days, the Rangers, often outnumbered and operating with limited resources, had been compelled to adapt, adopting many of the strategies, fieldcraft, and indeed some of the warlike customs of their primary adversaries, the Comanche. Within Comanche warrior culture, the taking of an enemy's scalp was a recognized rite, a tangible symbol of victory over a slain foe. In a society heavily reliant on prowess in hunting, raiding, and warfare, such trophies were more than mere markers of animosity or martial superiority. They functioned as a form of social currency. A warrior's collection of scalps served as undeniable proof of his deeds and valor in a milieu where martial skill was paramount for status and influence. Ironically, or perhaps inevitably, the culture of the Texas Rangers, forged in the same harsh environment and through years of bitter conflict and personal enmity, became imbued with similar sentiments. The act of scalping, therefore, while viewed with revulsion by many in more settled societies, had gained a degree of acceptance and even expectation within their ranks by this period. Noah Smithwick, having been the one to bring down the first Comanche warrior in the engagement, was consequently urged by his fellow Rangers to claim his rightful trophy. Smithwick recounted the process. The boys held an inquest upon the dead Comanche, and deciding that the gunshot would have proven fatal, awarded me the scalp. This inquest was a frontier formality, a collective agreement affirming his claim. However, Smithwick, perhaps out of modesty or a personal disinclination for the act itself, deferred the right to Conrad Rohrer. Rohrer, described by Smithwick as a man of generous spirit, then invoked a common hunter's rule, declaring that, by all the rules of the chase, he who brought down the game was entitled to the hide. With the matter thus settled, Rohrer himself performed the act of removing the scalp from the fallen warrior. He then took the grisly trophy and tied it to the horn of Smithwick's saddle. Smithwick permitted the scalp to remain there. His reasoning, as he later articulated, was that the sight of this bloody evidence, proof that at least one of the warriors, responsible for the destruction of her family, had paid the ultimate price, might offer Mrs. Hibbins, in her profound grief, some small, grim measure of retribution or satisfaction. It was a stark reflection of the brutal calculus of frontier justice and the psychological toll of the relentless violence that characterized life in Texas during that era. With the Hibbins child secured, and the macabre trophy of war fastened to Noah Smithwick's saddle, the detachment of Texas Rangers turned south, making their way towards Austin. The journey was somber, the recent violence and the child's presence weighing on the men. Smithwick later chronicled the arrival in the small settlement and the profoundly emotional scene that unfolded as they returned the boy to his mother. He wrote, "Late in the afternoon, we rode into the station in triumph. There was a suspicious moisture in many, and I long since a stranger to tears when the overjoyed mother clasped her only remaining treasure to her heart." In that moment of reunion, Smithwick found his gaze drawn to Conrad Rohrer. He could not help but contemplate what Rohrer's internal state might have been, had his rifle not providentially failed to fire upon the child he had mistaken for a foe. The reunion was not immediate in its full joy. Initially, the young Hibbins boy, overwhelmed by the profound grief of his recent losses and the sheer exhaustion of his captivity and rescue, did not seem to recognize his own mother. He was stunned, withdrawn into the shock of his experiences. Gradually, however, under the gentle assurances and familiar presence of his mother, the child began to calm. A sense of safety, so recently and violently absent from his young life, began to permeate his consciousness. For Mrs. Hibbins and her son, now the sole survivors of their family unit, words were inadequate to convey the complex tapestry of emotions they shared. The immense gravity of their losses, the deep well of sorrow, and the profound gratitude for this improbable reunion. Their comfort was found in the simple, powerful act of being together once more. The harrowing events at Walnut Creek were not an isolated incident on the Texas frontier of 1836. Indeed, Such terrifying encounters were a distressingly common feature of life for settlers during this period. In that year, amidst the turmoil of the Texas Revolution and only a few months before the pivotal Battle of the Alamo, the most pervasive and immediate threat to the majority of Texas settlers was not General Santa Anna's advancing Mexican army. Rather, it was the formidable and often seemingly indomitable Comanche, whose mastery of the plains cast a long shadow of fear. While the Rangers' recovery of the Hibbins child represented a clear success, such definitive victories in hostage situations had been exceedingly rare in the years leading up to this event. The Texas Rangers, as a fighting force, consistently operated under severe disadvantages. They were perpetually undermanned and chronically underfunded. Their primary armament consisted of single-shot rifles and pistols, requiring them to make every shot count in engagements where their adversaries were often more numerous and highly skilled in mounted combat. Much of their understanding of frontier warfare was acquired through direct, often brutal experience rather than formal training. Consequently, the Rangers had paid, and would continue to pay, a substantial price in lives lost and injuries sustained. Nearly every tactical lesson learned by this nascent frontier defense force was inscribed in blood. Conversely, while the Comanche Nation maintained a powerful hold over the southern plains during the 1830s, they too were experiencing significant and devastating losses. Vast swathes of their tribal lands were ravaged by outbreaks of smallpox, a disease against which they had no immunity and whose origins they could not comprehend. Thousands perished from these epidemics, a catastrophic blow to their relatively small population. The shifting geopolitical landscape of Texas during this period also delivered another detrimental impact to the Comanche at a particularly vulnerable time. The policies enacted by later Texas governors, notably Mirabeau Lamar, advocated for an increasingly aggressive, offensive stance against the Comanche and other indigenous tribes, policies that explicitly called for their complete eradication or removal. The Texas Revolution concluded with the Texan victory at San Jacinto on the 21st of April, 1836. While this event signaled an end to the widespread bloodshed between Texan and Mexican forces, the conflict between the Texas Rangers and the Comanche was destined to escalate in intensity. As Comanche populations continued to decline due to disease and warfare, their resolve to defend their ancestral territories only hardened. The Texas Rangers found themselves embroiled in a continuous struggle, not only against Comanche raiding parties and rustlers operating from the hill country, but also, at times, against the perceived indifference or fiscal limitations of their own Texas government. Appeals from ranger officers for increased manpower, more reliable supplies of ammunition, and improved weaponry frequently went unheeded by successive cash-strapped administrations. The ranger force itself would undergo periods of disbandment and subsequent reestablishment multiple times over the ensuing decade as Texas navigated its transition from an independent republic to an annexed state of the United States in the 1840s. A significant technological development, however, was on the horizon, one that would irrevocably alter the nature of warfare on the Texas frontier: the introduction of the 5-shot and later 6-shot revolving pistol developed by Samuel Colt of New Jersey. Former Texas Ranger Samuel H. Walker would play a crucial role in the refinement of this weapon. Walker traveled to New York to meet with Colt directly, where the two men collaborated on modifications to Colt's original Patterson design, tailoring it more specifically for the demanding conditions of Ranger service. Although Samuel Walker would tragically perish only a few months later during his service in the Mexican-American War, the firearm he helped to perfect, the Walker Colt, would go on to fundamentally change how his former comrades prosecuted their often violent duties. As for Noah Smithwick, his service with the Texas Rangers continued into the 1840s. He married Thursa M. Blakey in 1839 and later, in the 1860s, relocated to the area that is now Weberville, Texas. Encountering considerable local opposition due to his pro-Union stance during the Civil War, Smithwick eventually moved his family to Kern County, California. His wife Thursa passed away in 1871, but Noah Smithwick himself lived to the advanced age of 91, dying in Santa Ana, California in 1899. Smithwick's life and the Texas frontier offer more dramatic tales of conflict for another time. Walnut Creek's raw events show survival's brutal edge in a formative era. What unrecorded acts of bravery or desperation from this period do you believe deserve more attention?